Free Japan Channel number 79. Today, May 14th, Wednesday, 2025. The time is 7 o'clock p.m. Hello everybody. Good evening. Here is Mimasaka, Okayama Prefecture, here in Japan. Today's FCC topic is South Korea. Why developed so rapidly? South Korea is now boasting of its economic development as well as technological progress. Samsung is leading the area of semiconductor in the worldwide market. Hyundai is also the fourth or fifth automobile company. Not only these two companies, but also several worldwide leading companies can be seen in Korean economy. However, this economic development began only 1960s. Therefore, it is only 60 years that South Korea launched its economic boost. Therefore, South Korea achieved its economic growth in 60 years, during these 60 years. And 60 years is not enough, normally, for the development that South Korea has accomplished. Therefore, we can say that it was a very rapid progress that South Korea achieved during these 60 years. And today's topic, South Korea, why developed so rapidly? Korean War broke out in 1950, lasting 3 years. So this war ended in 1953. The total area of South Korea was completely devastated by this war, Korean War. So many people died. We don't have the exact statistics, but perhaps over 2 million people died, including civilians, during this Korean War, including North and South Korea. After the war, Korean Peninsula was divided into two parts, North Korea and South Korea, which means the power of South Korea became the half or less than half of the total. In fact, at the beginning of 1960s, South Korea was the poorest country, one of the poorest countries in the world. The statistics of United Nations say that the economic level of South Korea was the same as Ghana, one of the African countries, therefore poorest worldwide. However, then at the time. The ex-soldier, not ex-soldier, soldier at that time, still, Park Jong-hee did coup d'etat in South Korea. He was from Korean army and he controlled Korean army. Therefore, he had the power, force, and this coup d'etat was successful that Park Jong-hee could become president of South Korea. It was 1960s. Since then, the rapid progress of South Korea began. Therefore, the answer to today's theme, why South Korea develop so rapidly? The answer is that Park Jong-hee became president of South Korea 1960s, and his policy was so economic friendly. Therefore, under his administration, the President Samson and Hyundai could become bigger and bigger, and other companies could also expand its realms. The money from Japan flew into Korean economy as well. It was 1965 that Japan and Korea agreed to open the diplomacy. Before that, there was no diplomatic route between South Korea and Japan. Between North Korea and Japan, there is no diplomacy even now. Of course, there is some human connection. There is some human connection, so private human connection. However, official route is not found between Japan and North Korea, even now. And it was 1965 that the diplomacy between Japan and South Korea was normalized. And at the time, Japanese money went into Korean economy as a kind of reparation. Reparation for what? Reparation for World War II. South Korea was, during the war, a part of the great Japan Empire. And there were so many Koreans who fought with Japanese soldiers. And there was so much property from South Korea to be confiscated by Japanese government during the war. The reparation of 1965 was for this loss of property and loss of human beings. Looking back now, Park Jong-hee, President Park, made use of this Japanese money so effectively. He ordered to build the railroad between Seoul and Busan. Not only railroad, but also freeway was also built in the same stretch. In the process, Hyundai Construction could earn a great profit from this enterprise. and the original money was from Japan. Now Hyundai company is famous for its automobile field. However, originally Hyundai was famous for its construction field. Hyundai Construction was the original name. It was 1970s that Hyundai began to manufacture automobiles. Hyundai imitated Mitsubishi technology from the inception. Not only Hyundai, but also Samsung also learned or even stole the skills, precious skills from Sanyo Electricity, Japanese company. POSCO is a very famous Korean steel company. To POSCO also, the technique of Nippon Steel flew at that time. Japanese engineers and managers were so careless about being stolen the techniques and skills that it took 30 years or more to develop. Japanese managers and engineers gave Koreans this technology for free. Perhaps behind their heart, behind their mind, there was also some kind of sense of reparation for the war in the commercial or private level. So the second answer for today's question is that Japanese companies were so willing to give the latest technology to Korean companies. Perhaps Japanese companies didn't think that these Korean companies would one day become their rivals and threaten their own businesses. Japanese companies didn't predict it at all. Perhaps they were thinking of Korean companies as little brothers, So little brothers should be helped by elder brothers, of course. So this was the common sense of Japanese managers and engineers in 60s and 70s. So they were very generous to Korean companies. Therefore, Korean companies could catch up with the latest technology at a surprisingly high speed. And even in 1990s, these Korean companies began to threaten Japanese companies because Korean companies could produce the same level of products at low price. Then, in the world market, Korean products could overweigh Japanese products. Because the quality is the same, the price is lower, world consumers jump to Korean products instead of Japanese ones. In 2000 or 2010, Japanese manufacturing companies began to struggle because of the advent of rivals from Korea as well as Taiwan and afterwards from China. already Japanese company could never compete with low price. Korean, Taiwanese, and Chinese companies could produce the same or better products at lower price. Therefore, Japanese companies were expelled from the market. Some of them went bankrupt. Therefore, they did benefit. They gave the benefit to Korean companies from benevolence. However, these Korean companies led to the bankruptcy of these Japanese companies. This is a very ironical history, isn't it? Now, Korean products in some fields, for example, in semiconductor field, the products are much better, superior to Japanese ones. Japanese companies can't compete with Korean companies. Now, in some fields, self-developed has Korean economy that we Japanese have no choice but to be astounded by this progress. However, the seeds of this progress was scattered by Japanese engineers or managers in 1970s or 80s. In South Korea, there has been strong anti-Japan movement. South Koreans don't run this kind of history, the history of enterprises in the post-war period. Korean textbook doesn't tell it. So most of the Koreans, South Koreans, would think that Samsung and Hyundai and LG developed by their own. But they were not. They could develop totally thanks to Japanese companies. Without the expertise of Japanese companies, none of these Korean companies could survive in the world market. And present South Koreans don't appreciate this process of learning from Japan at all. I'm a Japanese, therefore I have some complex or complicated feeling about this historical process. Can you understand what I'm now saying? Anyway, South Korea is now fully developed and occupies one of G20s. And South Korea is located in the south of North Korea. Therefore, in a sense, South Korea was a kind of buffer for Japan as well as for the United States. South Korea had to invest much of its money into military field. On the other hand, Japanese people could do without this kind of burden under the peace constitution. Therefore, probably South Koreans also think that Japan was a free rider in the defense field. Only South Koreans were heavily burdened the military service, while Japanese are not. This is unfair. Perhaps this is a feeling of South Koreans concerning defense. This kind of complicated feeling on both sides is not so easily obliterated. However, South Korea is the nearest country from Japan. This is true. Therefore, we Japanese should seek for some reconciliation and partnership with South Korea. North Korea is still a threatening country, not only for South Korea, but also for Japan and for the United States. Therefore, these three countries, South Korea, Japan, the United States, should collaborate and develop tri-partnership, so-called. Thank you.